I'd like to start with Professor Norma. Thank you so much for joining us. How do we first define the gig economy and gig workers? What are its current definition in our context?
Thank you, Naila, and good afternoon, everyone. As you mentioned, gig is a project, is temporary, is as opposed to full-time employment. And I think it's also a generational thing, because my generation would go or would appreciate full-time employment where job security is the main objective. With the gig economy or gig workers, they appreciate flexible hours, non-tying, non-contract type of work. So it is about the relationship between the worker and the economic unit, i.e. the employer or whoever that you are doing the work with. So this is something that is not new. In 2018, the ILO did a work, an extensive research to understand and to see whether this is in line with the definition of decent work. Because in 2015, the Convention 204 talked about decent work. And it was then essentially to address women who normally work long hours. They are not paid. So there is no contract about what is her rights, what will be the benefits. Yeah. So with gig workers, for some, they experience a similar type of working arrangement. So, but you were talking about the push and pull factors. The push factors will be attracting, or rather for someone to be going into doing part-time work, for some of them, it's not necessarily by choice. It is something that they, especially with the crisis, or it came to light, especially in the world, was when the global global crisis, in 2007, 2009, where employment in the US was, unemployment was very high, and most people lost their jobs, and they will have to turn to some kind of contract work and with less working benefits. Yeah, so one has to differentiate between when one is doing by choice, or is it one doesn't have a choice. Yeah, it's not something that you can choose to do. And also, it depends on, there are different kinds of gig workers. Yeah, some are earning or doing very well, and some are not necessarily earning well. So you can talk about informal sector as well. Yeah, so gig are usually, even if they are in the formal sector, their type of work is an informal type of arrangement. Whereas people who are in the informal sector, they are self-employed and all that, and it can range from being very lowly paid and highly skilled as well. Yeah. So I'll pass it back to you, Naila.
Thank you so much, Prof. I like that little bit of history in the origin of the gig economy, especially with an emphasis on female participation in the workforce and, you know, in the informal economy. I thought that was very interesting. I did not know that myself. Nell, why do we see challenges in defining these terms? Why does it encompass so many roles, and what challenges does that pose then in a policy context? And why is it important to have a definite understanding of what these terms mean?
Okay, thanks. Thanks a lot, Naila. I think there's been an issue because of the way that it has been used in in recent times, in policy documents, in reports, and even in the media. It's come to mean a lot of very different things. So, for instance, I've been asked whether farmers and financial planners are gig workers. For example. If we go back to the definition that Prof has offered just now, the completion of one-off tasks, non-stipulation of fixed employment hours, low barriers to entry, those are all good markers of what is a gig work or what is in the gig economy, right? The fact that it can be mediated also by technology, so like gig platforms, online service marketplaces, is also an important factor. To your question about why it's important to define these terms, right? It's important for two reasons. So for me, one of these terms, the term gig economy, it includes a class of informal work that is a little bit different from older conceptions of informal work, right? So we used to talk about solopreneurs, right, on one hand, then also like on temporary workers on the other end that receives, some kind of monthly wage, even though there's no employment contract. So there is a class of work within gig work that is slightly different from these two, extreme ends. To defining these terms correctly and being clear about the boundaries of the term is important because it's important to figure out what their employment status is, which I would argue is not adequately covered by the classifications that we have today. And this is important not just for naming per se, right? Employment status has a lot of impact on issues like workers' rights, social protection coverage, who insures that they are covered, the split of responsibility between state and the quote-unquote employer, and so on and so forth. There are many others. So yeah, these are basically the reasons why we need to get the term correct.
What in actuality these policies can look like once we have a better understanding of what the definitions can mean. Sean, speaking about these definitions, I think for me as well as a lot of other people, companies like Grab have reshaped what most of us think of when we hear the word gig economy. The movers and shakers of the industry, such as Grab, can have a huge impact on what the entire ecosystem can look like. So what are some initiatives that Grab has in place for your gig workers?
Yeah, I can talk about this for a long time, but I don't want this to become a sort of like corporate session. But there's lots of programs that we put in place, and I think it's still not enough. We're still working on new ones. But if I had to choose maybe two major ones that I think really matter, the first one is just general benefits. So in the gig system, I think there's a misconception that there's a lack of benefits because you don't have an employer who's willing to pay for these benefits. Actually, what we're seeing is that benefits can be even better than in a traditional employment model, because as a digital platform, we actually have more volume and power to sort of bring these benefits on board. So, for example, for Grab, we have fuel discounts, we've got maintenance discounts, cheaper insurance and financial services, just giving access to financial products. We've extended these products to the family as well, and then of course deals on F&B and consumer. I think you'll find that most traditional employers would typically not bring so many benefits on board. So that's one. The second one I think is sort of maybe even more important, which is the concept of protection. Sometimes people talk about the gig economy not having a safety net, which I'll talk more about later. But for me, one defining factor about the digital gig economy is that it is a safety net for the society in the sense that anyone who just runs out of a job or are in between jobs can just switch on this income in as little as 9 days in Grab, for example. Since the MCO started last year, we've seen more than 50,000 signups, for example. So that's 50,000 less unemployment. So that is the safety net. But the question is this safety net strong enough? Can we strengthen it, right? So on the topic of protection, one typical conversation is around future retirement savings and social protection. So we do work with the EPF and SOCSO, for example, to incentivize contributions. We have a group policy for personal accidents. We don't make this very public, but basically every job on Grab is covered. And then we've got sort of safety. Safety I can talk about for another hour, but basically technology is, I think, one of the biggest catalysts for safety. I'll just give one quick example. Every single delivery or ride on Grab is tracked in terms of telematics data. We know how fast people are going, how hard they're braking. And that data can be used to sort of continuously inform decisions on who needs to be, for example, retrained on road safety rules.
And I'm sure for a lot of people, I thought one particular thing that was interesting was how you saw, gig platforms is becoming a safety net and how benefits can be better in the traditional model of the workforce. So a lot of interesting things to pick out from there. But I do want to move on to Lina, who maybe can provide a different perspective or perhaps the same thing. Nina, I think before the advent of e-hailing companies, gig workers, at least for myself, were more often associated with the arts industry, such as Red Communications. So, what have been some initiatives at your production house, and particularly since you've been in the industry for much longer, how do you see these initiatives have evolved throughout time?
Okay, well, yes, we've been in the industry for more than 20 over years. And, the industry, the arts industry, particularly the film and television, commercial industry, we rely a lot on freelancers. In those days, the word gig doesn't even exist. So we use the word freelancers, which technically means that people who are not employed. And we have a whole range of different freelancers, ranging from actors to, of course, your cameraman, your camera crew, your gaffer, your lighting grip, your art department, your wardrobe, your makeup artist. Everyone is hired on a project basis with contracts based on the project. So if you have a movie set, like when we do a movie, we hire about close to 100 to 150 people to 200 people, depending. If we have a scene with 50 extras, there you go, we need 50 extras. So in essence, this is the practice and this is the normal in the industry from then till now. And in terms of changes, I guess with the advent of digital, it's much easier, of course, to find people. You have very small productions like digital production saying, I need some extras, an actor who wants to act in it. I need a parent young woman who looks like, who's a Chinese, blah, 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 blah. And then they put it up on, say, some of the sites like Malaysian Facebook, freelance Facebook, or they put it up on casting sites. We put it up on social media. And we get lots of calls. So it's much easier to find talent nowadays. It's not so easy to find the more skilled workers. Like you need to know where to go to find a good art director, a good makeup artist, specialized makeup artist. They're probably less than 10. You can count on your fingers. It's not the kind of industry where, unfortunately, the entry level. Well, while the entry level can be low at the production side, everybody can be a PA because, you're required to make coffee, pick up rubbish. No, I'm just joking. But it's true. That's mostly the entry level. But generally, if you want to be specialized, like if you want to be a gaffer, you want to be a grip, you want to be a art director, you want to be a director, now there's courses to do that. But for the rest of the people, you really start at the lowest entry level point. Literally, you make the coffee, carry the bags, sweep the floors, unfortunately, but yes.
Just constrain ourselves to just looking at the question, yes, formalized or not formalized. I think there's a lot of nuances here to take into account, especially from a worker's perspective, right?
Yeah.
How much power and control should one actually have, and how much of it then actually boils down to the nature of their own job. Can one worker actually have that much control and freedom when that is just really the nature of their job? Should the government step in and enforce certain controls around that? I do want to hear from Sean. How does Grab see this balance in formalizing, but at the same time, making sure there's enough room for the company to grow? Do you see this as sort of trying to achieve an equilibrium, or how do you frame this?
Yeah, a few things I wanted to say. Actually, I agree with most of the points. The first one was on barriers. So I think we're all sort of aligned on sort of this concept of making sure that the flexible income opportunities remain accessible. To give you a sense of barriers, when the e-hailing regulations were rolled out in 2019, we immediately saw 30% of our gig economy participants drop out. Like that's just the immediate fallout. Imagine all the other people who were deterred from accessing this supplementary income afterwards. So I think no matter what we do with policy and regulations, we need to be very careful not to impose new barriers. That's number one. And then number two, this concept of formal and informal, I don't actually see the gig economy as informal. In fact, it's kind of as formal as it gets. Like all jobs are recorded, the earnings breakdown is all clear and transparent. Quality ratings, training is done, feedback is all transparent and shared back, safety data. So it's actually very formal. I think maybe the real question, as Nell pointed out, actually is how do we make sure that they receive not just a safety net that they can turn on when things get tough or when they're underemployed. How do we make sure they have the best safety net? And this is the question on social protection. We all know that most people, including Malaysians, are not incentivized to save for their future selves. Let future me worry about this. And that's why we have got social sort of programs that force people to put money in. I'll give you this contrast, right? So, recently ICNR sort of got mobilized, money came out, 3 million something Malaysians. That's 1 in 5 Malaysians in the labor force got some form of payout up to 10,000 ringgit. Immediately, we saw more than 10% of our drivers just disappear. If you're trying to order food today or in the past week and you're finding it hard to get a driver, this is why. I'm so sorry. And that actually prompts a question, right? If the moment I get to draw down from my future self, I'm going to stop working, that's a real problem. And the only way to solve this is two things. Number one, make sure that people continue to earn income so that they don't have to draw down on their future savings. And number two, once they're comfortable and they can earn enough, can we either incentivize or mandate some sort of contribution to their future savings? I think that's the crux of the question here.
Thanks, Sean. Lina, I feel like when we touched on the issue of freedom and control that a gig worker has, I think this can probably translate to a much deeper meaning for those in the arts industry. Having creative control and freedom over your work, I believe, is something very important to all workers, but particularly more so for those in the arts industry. How do you see this discussion, this narrative of formalizing and not formalizing? What do you see is perhaps the most specific needs of the workers in your company and the arts industry as a whole?
So I also wear two hats. I'm also sitting on the board of FINAS at the moment, and we have had these discussions a lot of times. So again, as an employer, you are looking for obviously the best people in the industry to hire, right? And where do you go? You go to your regulars. Now, when we talk to the people, the makeup artists, the workers, the gaffers, the director of photography, where do they go to have protection? Do they have a union? Because they all operate as individuals, right? Now, there are organizations, one namely called Profima, which is an organization that actually unfortunately, there was a huge umbrella, and a couple of years, in order for for producers like me to get a license to produce a film, I have to get a license from FINAS. And in order for me to get the license from FINAS, I have to hire from these people who are all registered under associations, whether it's Profima for all the gaffer, the crew, the production managers, or some Seniman for all the actors, or from Karyawan, or even FDAM, Directors Association, Film Directors Association. So now the issue is that, like a lot of the people who are in the industry, the entry level, you graduate, you have to join these associations. And the biggest gripe from the people on the ground is that, okay, here I am having to spend another, 200 ringgit or another 40 ringgit just to join an association that does not give me anything. No protection, nothing. They don't. I mean, they have a once a year AGM, but they do nothing for me. And as an employer, when these people join this association, as employer, I get nothing from them either. Like they don't guarantee me if that person is an FDM member or Seniman member, they're any better than the person who's not. They're just meaningless associations that don't do anything for either side of the party. Now, this is where the discussion is for our side. How do we then protect both sides of the parties?
Norma, you mentioned earlier that you were not, you want to maintain the low barrier of entry for the gig economy, for a lot of the industries in this economy. But then, as you mentioned before, there are issues with social protection, and in this case that Lina has raised, the lack of formal outlets for workers. What do you then see is a realistic option for people like Lina has spoken to, that are facing the same issues that we see also in Astro AWANI, we tend to give or shed light on a lot of people in the arts industry that face these kind of issues. So, how do you see a more realistic structure for these grievances?
I think the protection has to, it need not come from the government to protect, but the government provide the regulatory or the framework for people to be protected. And of course, if they are low income, the government will have to come in. Yeah. So just in the past, was the end of last year that the PM has announced for budget 2021 that about 20 million or so that is paid for social insurance for e-hailing drivers, yeah, for employment injury, yeah. So the government has to step in order to provide some kind of protection, yeah, and that also would mean that it would include savings for the future, savings for when you're old, and I agree with Sean, yeah. When people know that they can draw down their savings, they will. I mean, I will take care of old me later when the time comes, but not now. I mean, nobody can imagine that they will be 60 years old, 65 years old when they're 25 or they're 30. They thought they're going to be 30 forever. Yeah. So it's the government that has to make it. I mean, we are proposing for it to be mandatory that every Malaysian, I propose an age, but apparently if you propose an age, you will face a challenge that some people work when even they were younger than 18 or 15. Yeah. But if you go by how we classify as adults will be, or working adults will be 15, and for Malaysia, 15 to 59, because our retirement age is 60. So to make it compulsory for every adult, every Malaysian adult, to contribute to a fund. And this fund will be invested. So it is some kind of pooling of social insurance that everyone contribute, and it's the pool where you cross-subsidize. The richer will, so that is a system that Perkeso has, for instance, the social insurance. So Naila, the only way that we can secure the future or to protect the or any kind of risks that our people go through, yeah, because it's not just old age. It is also, what if you're injured? I know that if they're lucky, they go on Grab platform, they're fine, they're insured. But Sean, how about those who are not on that kind of platform, if anything goes wrong with them? Hence, the proposal of the policy for the government to contribute to that 20 million for workers who will have to go through this kind of platform or work. Well, it is insured, because this is not insured at the moment. If the person is sick, what's going to happen to him and his family? Yeah, or become disabled. So we are in discussions, and we are. I think you're aware that there is a Malaysian Social Protection Council, my SPC, that the Prime Minister chairs, my SPC. So a lot of these discussions will go into that.
Social protection schemes and how this should be made compulsory, not exactly or directly related to the types of employment or age even, because I think the biggest lesson that we can take from the pandemic is that it's not just about age, it's not just about health risks, it's about, the entire economy on the brink of shutting down. That risk is now always there. And so how do you see then labor policy as a whole? Should that then also be re-examined?
Absolutely.
When we're talking about the gig economy?
No, absolutely. This increasing informalization, so what we used to have, basically a majority of contracts are open-ended, and now because businesses are getting a lot more cautious, they don't know the shape of the recovery, right? Even with the vaccination rollout, you can't tell the future, right? But they've gotten burned. So many of these contracts would now probably be turned into more temporary contracts, whereas before it was open-ended. So what does that mean, right? Do we call everybody gig workers then who are on these contracts? I mean, arguably, no, but you still do need to have long-term thinking about what happens to these sort of workers. So let's say you are on a 12-month contract, right? So like Sean said, I mean, it's not like you can just turn on your phone and then get the 12-month contract tomorrow, right? So there are some barriers to entry. It is not a one-off or a quick task. So how do we make sure that you still have the benefits that a formal full-time employee had, right? So then, yeah, we get into questions about how do we enroll people, what kind of protection schemes there are to get people automatically in them, right? Automatically enroll. How do we get deductions done, and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, the quick answer to your question, sorry, is that you do need a policy for this kind of worker. And presumably there is one called the independent, it's around independent contractors, but it needs to be more developed.
Thank you once again to everyone. We hope you enjoyed the discussion today, and we hope you were able to take home some of the key points. And a particular shout out to Sean. Thanks for answering some of the other questions that people had specifically for Grab in the chat room. We weren't able to touch on that, but thank you so much. And we hope to see you again in the future with more discussions. Thanks once again, and have a good day.